When I first saw her, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It was early morning. The storm from the night before had buried the cabin in white silence, the kind of silence that presses on your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I had just stoked the fire and poured coffee when something, I don't even know what, made me turn toward the door. And that's when it happened. She was standing there, a wolf, not pacing, not snarling, just standing. Her paws sunk deep in the snow, her fur dusted with frost, steam curling from her breath like smoke from a chimney. She wasn't just looking in my direction, she was looking at me, and in that moment, I swear my heart stopped, because I realized she wasn't there by accident. You ever have one of those moments when the world tilts under your feet? When you feel small, like the rules you thought you knew just shattered? That was me, frozen in the middle of that cabin, staring through the glass into eyes that didn't belong to any wild animal I'd ever seen. They were yellow, sharp, and yet there was something human in them. Fear hit first, a cold rush down my spine. Every instinct screamed, "Don't move, don't even breathe. I live in wolf country. I know what they're capable of. One wrong move, and you don't make it to the door handle." But then, confusion crept in, because she didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth, didn't lunge. She just stood there, chest heaving softly, her breath fogging up the morning air. Snowflakes clung to her fur like bits of broken glass. She wasn't hunting me. She wasn't angry. She looked tired. That's what stopped me from grabbing the rifle. Something in the way she held herself, ears low, tail not tucked in fear, but lowered in something else, something I couldn't name yet. And then those eyes, locked on mine like she was trying to tell me something. I remember whispering out loud, like a fool talking to an empty room, "What do you want?" No answer, of course, just the wind hissing through the pines and the faint crackle of fire behind me. I thought for sure, any second now, she'd turn and vanish into the trees. Just like that, like a ghost in the snow. That's what wolves do. They disappear. But she didn't move. Not an inch. And that was the first time the fear gave way to something else. Something heavier. Something that felt like the weight of a secret pressing on my chest. Because the longer I stared, the more I realized she didn't look like a predator. She looked desperate. I can't explain it better than that. There was a kind of stillness in her that didn't belong to a creature of the wild. It wasn't hunger driving her. It wasn't rage. It was need. That's when it happened. The sound that changed everything. She whimpered, just once, low, broken, like the air leaking out of a torn bag. And I swear, it wasn't the sound of an animal warning you off. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. My stomach turned cold. My hands started to shake, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, because that sound didn't belong in this frozen silence. That sound belonged in the throat of something begging for help, and that's when the questions started pounding in my head like fists on a locked door. Why is she here? Why my door? Why isn't she attacking? I didn't move. Couldn't. Just stood there, one hand gripping the edge of the table like if I let go, I'd fall straight through the floor. If anyone had walked in at that moment and told me I was dreaming, I would have believed them, because this wasn't how nature worked. Wolves don't come to humans. Wolves don't ask. But this one did. And that was the moment everything I thought I knew about the wild cracked wide open. I don't know how long we stood like that, me on one side of the door, her on the other. The fire popped behind me, but I couldn't feel the heat anymore. Every second stretched like a wire about to snap. And then, without really deciding, I moved. My fingers brushed the door handle. It felt like ice under my skin. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out everything. The wind outside, the blood in my ears, even my own thoughts. The old hinges groaned as I cracked the door open an inch, then two. Cold air knifed through the gap, stinging my face. She didn't flinch, no growl, no flash of teeth. Instead, she stepped back, slow, careful, like she didn't want to scare me. That froze me more than any snarl could have. Wolves don't retreat, not for humans, but she did. Then she turned, not all the way, just enough to show me her flank before she looked over her shoulder. And God help me, if I didn't know better, I'd say she was waiting for me. Everything inside me screamed, stay inside, bolt the door, throw wood on the fire, forget this ever happened. But then her eyes caught mine again, eyes that didn't belong to a killer in the wild, but something else, something raw, something that almost felt like hope. And just like that, my legs betrayed me. I stepped out onto the porch. Snow squeaked under my boots. The air bit like a fist of needles. Every instinct told me this was madness. Wolves aren't pets. They're not messengers from fairy tales. They're survival written in fur and bone. But she didn't move, didn't run. She took 2 more steps, slow as smoke rising from a dying fire. Then she stopped and looked back at me again, this time holding my gaze so long I forgot how to breathe. And then she did it again. That sound, that broken whimper that didn't belong to a creature of dominance. It belonged to something stripped bare of everything except one thing, a plea. I almost closed the door right then, almost told myself, this is insane. Let her vanish back into the trees where she belongs. But then she whimpered again, softer this time, almost fragile. And I swear on everything I am, it felt like that sound reached inside my chest and squeezed. I don't know what part of me moved first, the part that feared her, or the part that couldn't bear the thought of turning away. Maybe it was both, tangled together like roots. All I know is that a second later, I was grabbing my coat from the hook, shoving my arms through the sleeves with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I stepped off the porch. The cold hit me like a hammer. The snow crunched under my boots, deep and soft, swallowing sound. The storm had eased, but the sky hung heavy with gray, like the world hadn't finished deciding what to do with me yet. And her? She just stood there, 10 paces ahead, tail low but steady, body coiled with a tension that didn't feel dangerous. It felt desperate. And those eyes, God, those eyes. They weren't wild. They weren't tame. They were pleading, like she was saying one word without a sound. Please. The first step off the clearing felt like crossing a line I could never come back from. The snow was deeper here, swallowing my boots almost to the knee. The cold wrapped around me like a steel trap, biting through layers of wool and leather as if they weren't there. The storm had passed, but the world wasn't calm. It was listening. The trees loomed like dark pillars, their branches heavy with snow, bending under the weight of silence. Every sound, the crunch of my boots, the rasp of my breath, felt too loud, like the forest didn't want me there. And ahead of me, her, the wolf moved like a shadow, sliding over the snow with a grace that made my own stumbling look pitiful. Every few steps, she'd stop, turn her head just enough to meet my eyes, then keep moving, checking, waiting. I don't know why that unsettled me more than if she'd just vanished. Wolves don't care if you follow. They disappear. They want to disappear, but not her. Every time I thought, this is it, she's gone. I can go back, lock the door, forget this ever happened. She'd stop again, just enough to pull me deeper. What am I doing? I muttered under my breath, the words puffing into the air in little clouds of fear. This is insane. No answer, of course. Just the creak of branches shifting under snow. My mind kept spitting out warnings like sparks from a dying fire. Wolves are dangerous. Wolves lure prey. Wolves don't ask, they take. And yet, here I was, following her, because something in her eyes back at the cabin had unmoored me from everything I thought I knew. I thought about turning back a dozen times in that first 5 minutes. My fingers were going numb inside my gloves. My legs ached from forcing through the drifts. And the weight of that silence, it was crushing. But then, it came. The sound that snapped every nerve in my body to attention. Faint at first, so faint I thought it was the wind threading through the pines. A thin, quivering sound that didn't belong to the creak of wood or the moan of snow. It was a cry, software fragile, broken like glass underfoot. I stopped dead. My breath caught so hard it burned. It wasn't the wolf in front of me. She stood still now, ears pricked, eyes locked on mine like she knew I'd heard it too. And that's when my stomach twisted. Because that sound, it wasn't human. But it wasn't wild in the way it should have been either. It was something small, something suffering, a whine, coming from deeper in the woods. The cold didn't matter anymore. The fear didn't matter. Only that sound clawing at my insides, dragging me forward whether I wanted to go or not. The wolf turned again, her body taut with urgency, and started moving faster now. Her paws skimmed the snow like she was born of it, and I stumbled after her, lungs screaming, legs burning. I thought for sure she'd just vanish between the trees, leave me stranded, alone in this frozen nowhere. That's what would have made sense. That's what nature does. It leaves you behind. But she didn't. She waited. Every few yards, she'd stop, glance back, eyes burning gold through the gray light, pulling me like a rope knotted around my chest. And all I could think, over and over, was one question pounding like a drum inside my skull. Where is she leading me? The cry grew louder as we moved deeper into the woods, a thin thread of sound unraveling through the trees. Every time I thought we were close, it shifted, like the forest itself was trying to hide it. Then the wolf stopped. She froze so suddenly I almost stumbled into her. Her body stiffened, ears forward, nose cutting the air. And then I saw it. At first, it looked like nothing but a heap of broken branches under a crust of snow. But then a small movement flickered from beneath, and my chest seized. It was alive. A pup, tiny, gray, legs thrashing weakly under the weight of a fallen tree limb that looked heavy enough to pin a grown man. The snow around it was churned and red where bark had scraped skin. Its cries were muffled, thin, desperate, and in that moment, everything inside me tilted. This wolf, this mother, she hadn't come to hunt. She hadn't come to fight. She'd come to beg. I swear on my own life, that's what it was. A wild creature of teeth and instinct, asking for help. My breath fogged the air as she moved closer to the pup, pawing at the snow in frantic, useless swipes. The branch didn't budge. Then she stopped, slowly turned her head toward me, and looked straight into me. Not at me, into me. And what I saw in those eyes made my throat close. It wasn't rage. It wasn't command. It was something I didn't think nature allowed in a predator like her. It was trust, and God, that hit harder than fear ever could. My hands shook as I dropped to my knees in the snow. The cold bit through my jeans like teeth. Every cell in my body screamed, "What are you doing? You're on your knees in front of a wolf." She stood inches away, chest heaving, steam curling off her fur. One lunge and I was done, but she didn't move, except for her eyes, locked on mine like a lifeline stretched between two species that had no business sharing it. I grabbed the thickest branch I could find and wedged it under the fallen limb. My boots slipped. The wood groaned. My shoulders burned like fire, but I pushed harder, teeth clenched until they ached. And then, finally, the branch shifted with a crack that split the silence like a gunshot. Snow tumbled, the weight lifted. The pup scrambled free, legs wobbling, collapsing into the snow with a whimper that sliced me in two. The mother was on him in a heartbeat, nuzzling his neck, licking the blood from his fur with a tenderness that made my chest ache. The pup pressed into her, trembling, alive. I sat back on my heels, breath sawing out of me in clouds, my heart trying to climb through my ribs. My gloves were torn, my hands stung with splinters. I didn't care, because I'd just done something no sane man would believe. I'd saved a wolf's child, and lived. For one fragile moment, I thought it was over. I thought that was all she wanted, that she'd take her pup and vanish into the white silence, and I'd stumble home and spend the rest of my life wondering if it was real. But then she did something that made my blood run cold. She looked at me again, not quick, not fleeting, held my gaze, her eyes burning gold in the gray light. And then she turned, started walking, not slow this time, not careful, faster, urgent. I stared after her, my breath still tearing at my throat, my brain screaming, what now? What could possibly be next? The pup limped beside her, pressing into her side, alive but shaky. She didn't look back this time, just moved forward, tail low, steps slicing into the snow like sentences in a language I wasn't meant to read. I hesitated for half a heartbeat. My body begged me to stop, to go home, to forget. But something deeper, something primal, dragged me to my feet and pulled me after her. Because I knew one thing now with a certainty that shook me to the bone. She saved her pup, but she wasn't done with me. I thought the first miracle was enough for one lifetime. Saving that pup felt like stepping through some invisible door, a door that should have slammed shut the second it opened. But it didn't, because the she-wolf kept moving, and like a fool, or maybe something worse, something I can't name, I kept following. My lungs burned with every breath, my boots were soaked, my legs trembling from dragging through knee-deep snow, but I couldn't stop. The trees thinned, shadows stretching long in the gray light, until we broke into a clearing that looked like the mouth of some old, buried secret. And that's where I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a dark shape sprawled in the snow, another fallen log or patch of stone, but then it moved, just barely, just enough for the truth to slam into me like a fist. A wolf, huge, male, his fur matted with blood, his sides heaving in shallow, ragged breaths, his leg twisted at an angle that made my stomach lurch, the steel glint of a wire trap biting into his flesh. I stopped dead. Everything in me screamed to back away. This was the part where things turned, where nature reminded me that mercy has a price. But the mother didn't look at me like prey. She didn't look at me like a threat. She looked at me like the answer. And that was the moment my fear gave way to something bigger, something that shook me harder than the cold ever could. Because what kind of world was this, where a wolf would put her life, her family, her future in the hands of a man? Slowly, I dropped to my knees, every nerve on fire. The male wolf's eyes burned into me, gold and furious. A growl rumbled low in his throat, a sound that carried the weight of death in it. I whispered, God knows why. Maybe to him, maybe to myself. Easy, I'm not here to hurt you. My hands shook as I dug into the snow, searching for the steel jaws that held him. The wire was slick with blood, biting deep into muscle. One wrong move, and those teeth would be in my throat before I could scream. I worked the branch under the trap, using every ounce of strength I had left. My gloves tore, my knuckles split open, the cold biting into raw flesh. The wolf snarled, his breath hot on my arm, his teeth flashing inches from my skin. But he didn't lunge, not once, because maybe, just maybe, he understood what I was doing. The wire gave with a metallic snap that echoed like a gunshot through the clearing. The male wolf collapsed into the snow, legs twitching, breath sawing in and out. Blood stained the white around him like spilled ink. And then, silence. The mother moved to him, nudging his neck, licking his wound with a gentleness that made my chest ache all over again. The pup limped forward, pressing against his father's side, their bodies folding together like pieces of something too fragile to break apart. And me? I just knelt there, staring at them, my breath burning in my lungs, my hands trembling so hard I couldn't feel the ground beneath them, because in that frozen clearing, surrounded by blood and snow and the steam of living breath, I understood something I'd never believed before. In that moment, I wasn't a man, and they weren't beasts. We were the same. I thought that was it. I thought she wanted nothing else from me, that I'd done the unthinkable twice and the story would end there, me staggering back to my cabin with a secret I'd carry to the grave. But then she turned, slowly, deliberately, and started walking, not into the forest this time, back toward my cabin. I swear, the blood in my veins turned to ice, because if everything up to now had shattered the rules, this was something else entirely, and I had no idea what waited on the other side of it. I don't know how long I followed her after that clearing. Time had no meaning anymore, just the rhythm of my boots crunching in the snow, the ache in my legs, and the silhouette of that wolf cutting through the trees ahead of me. The pup limped behind her, the male trailing slow, but alive. And every few steps, she'd glance back, just enough to make sure I was still there, like she wasn't done with me yet. The forest thinned. The sky cracked open in pale gray light. And then I saw it through the trees, the dark line of the cabin's roof, hunched under a heavy quilt of snow. For the first time in hours, I felt something close to relief. My hands were numb, my throat was raw, my body begged for heat, for fire, for the simple safety of four walls and a door that locked. But that relief didn't last, because the she-wolf didn't veer off into the trees. She walked straight toward the cabin, my stomach clenched so hard it felt like a fist in my gut. Every nerve screamed, "Number. This isn't right. This isn't how the story ends." I slowed as the porch came into view, my boots dragging through the drifts like they weighed 100 pounds. She climbed the steps without hesitation and stopped in front of the door. My door, the same one she'd stood before that morning like some impossible omen. And then she turned, not to leave, not to lunge, to look at me. Her eyes burned through the gray light, molten gold and shadow, holding me still in a way no weapon ever could. Then she turned her head again, toward the trees. That's when I heard it, the soft crunch of snow from the dark beyond the clearing, low shapes slipping through the trees like smoke. My breath caught, my chest locking tight as the shadows took form. 4 of them, 4 wolves. They emerged in silence, spreading out across the edge of the clearing like sentinels carved from frost and shadow. Their breath curled in silver ribbons, their eyes flickered like lanterns in the dusk, and not one of them moved toward me, not one of them bared teeth. They sat, just sat, as if the world had turned upside down and predators had become protectors. I stood frozen on the porch, every thought in my head stripped down to static. My pulse hammered like a trapped bird against my ribs. This wasn't nature. This wasn't anything I'd ever seen or believed in. And then the truth hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. She'd brought me home. Not because she wanted something more, not because I was in danger, because in some wild, unfathomable way, she wanted to make sure I was safe. They didn't owe me anything, but they came to protect me. For a long time, no one moved. Not me, not them. Just the sound of the wind combing through the trees, the soft whisper of snow shifting under the weight of the world, turned strange. Finally, the she-wolf stepped down from the porch. She didn't look at me again, didn't need to. She moved back toward the trees, her pup limping at her side, the male following like a shadow stitched from pain and pride. The others rose and fell in behind them, their bodies folding into the forest like they'd never been there at all. And just like that, they were gone. I stood there long after the last trace of them vanished, the cold gnawing at my skin, my breath hanging like smoke in the gray air. I thought that was the last time I'd see them. I thought the story ended there. But nature had one more truth to show me. The night passed in fragments. I don't even remember crawling into bed, only the way the fire's glow flickered against the walls like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Sleep came in broken shards, haunted by golden eyes and the weight of snow pressing down like the silence of a world that had just rewritten itself. When the light came, it wasn't the harsh glare of daylight, but the pale breath of dawn spilling across the floor. For a moment, I thought it was over. Just a dream stitched together by the storm and my own loneliness. Then I heard it. Not a sound, not really, just the absence of one. The kind of stillness that pulls you to your feet without asking why. I pulled on my coat, my boots still stiff with frost, and opened the door. And there they were. The clearing shimmered under the first blush of morning, snow like crushed glass catching the fragile light. And in the middle of it, not shadows, not ghosts, wolves, the pack, 5 of them, sitting like statues carved from bone and breath, their bodies rimed with frost, their eyes burning with something that wasn't hunger and wasn't rage, something I didn't have words for. My throat locked. My breath stuttered, and then she moved, the she-wolf, slow, deliberate, each step carving meaning into the snow, her head low, her ears soft, not submission, not threat, something else, something that made my chest ache like a wound. I didn't move, couldn't. She stopped just a breath away, so close I could feel the heat of her life against the frozen air. Her eyes held mine, and in that molten gold was a language older than words, older than fire, older than every rule I thought I understood. And then, she touched me, just once. Her nose brushed against my hand, a feather-light press that sent a shock through my body like lightning in the dead of winter. Her touch wasn't a threat. It was gratitude, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, the kind that humbles you until you don't know whether to fall to your knees or weep where you stand. And then, as quickly as it came, the moment broke. She turned. The others rose as if pulled by a silent thread, their bodies flowing back toward the trees, snow whispering under their paws. No sound, no pause, no second glance, until the forest swallowed them whole, gone. I stood there, frozen on the porch, the wind combing cold fingers through my hair, my breath shaking like a child's. Tears burned my eyes and slid hot down my face, steam curling where they touched the winter air. Because I understood something then, something that will live under my skin until the day the earth swallows my bones. Words hit harder than fists, but her silence hit harder than any words ever could. In that silence was every truth we pretend not to know, that trust is a gift sharper than teeth, that mercy binds stronger than fear, that the wild isn't chaos, it's a language we've forgotten how to hear. A wild wolf asked for help, trusted a man, and thanked him. If I hadn't seen it myself, I'd never believe it, but I did, and I'll never be the same. If you believe animals remember kindness, right, nature never forgets. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe. This is where real stories live.